Picture a king so evil he stood at his palace window shooting fleeing civilians with a crossbow, laughing as he killed them. Another so proud of skinning people alive that he carved instructions into stone monuments, and one who killed 10 million people while the world celebrated him as a hero. These aren't fictional monsters from Game of Thrones. These were real kings, and what they did will make your blood run cold. Today we're counting down the 5 most evil kings in human history, men with unlimited power who used it to satisfy their darkest, most twisted impulses. We're starting with someone who turned murder into a personal hobby, King John of England. King John of England earned the nickname John Lackland because he lost most of England's territories in France. But that's the least of his problems. This guy was a complete psychopath who enjoyed the personal touch when it came to murder and torture. John was obsessed with other men's wives. When nobles refused to let him sleep with their wives and daughters, he'd have them imprisoned, tortured, or killed. In 1208, John had a dispute with Geoffrey de Norwich over some land, so he ordered Geoffrey's wife to be imprisoned at Corfe Castle, where she was slowly starved to death along with her son. They found their bodies huddled together after 11 days without food. But John's most horrific act involved Arthur of Brittany, his own nephew who had a claim to the throne. In 1203, John personally murdered the 16-year-old boy. According to witnesses, John got drunk one night, sailed across to where Arthur was imprisoned and killed him with his own hands. He then tied a stone to the body and threw it in the River Seine. The barons were so disgusted by John's behaviour that they forced him to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, basically the first document to limit a king's power. When John tried to ignore it, the barons rebelled. He died a year later, possibly poisoned by his own monks. Even in death, John was hated. His funeral was barely attended. Killing individuals is one thing. Our number 4 ordered the slaughter of thousands before he was even out of his teens. Charles IX became King of France when he was just 10 years old. By the time he died at 23, he had orchestrated one of the most brutal massacres in European history. What makes Charles especially evil is the scale and joy he took in mass murder. Charles was heavily influenced by his mother, Catherine de Medici, who used him as a puppet to eliminate French Protestants known as Huguenots. On August 24, 1572, Charles gave the order for the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. He reportedly told his advisors, "Kill them all so that no one will be left to reproach me." Over the next several weeks, between 5,000 and 30,000 Huguenots were brutally murdered across France. But here's the really sick part. Charles apparently enjoyed it. Witnesses claimed he would stand at his palace window shooting at fleeing Huguenots with a crossbow, laughing as he killed them. Bodies floated down the Seine River for weeks. Entire families were wiped out. Children were torn from their mothers' arms and butchered in the streets. The massacre was so brutal that even the Pope was shocked by the violence. Charles tried to justify it by claiming the Huguenots were plotting against him, but historians now know this was largely fabricated. The guilt apparently ate him alive. Charles began having nightmares and fits of rage. He died just 2 years later at age 23. On his deathbed, he reportedly said he saw rivers of blood and begged for forgiveness. Think that's evil? Our number 3 created his own death squad and literally beat his own son to death. Ivan IV of Russia didn't get the nickname the Terrible for nothing. This guy literally beat his own son to death in a fit of rage, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. What makes Ivan more evil than Charles is the systematic nature of his cruelty and the fact that he institutionalized torture and terror as tools of government. He didn't just order massacres, he created an entire system designed to maximize human suffering. Ivan's reign of terror began early. When he was crowned Tsar at age 16, he celebrated by having his enemies thrown to packs of hungry dogs. But his real madness started in 1565, when he created the Oprichniki, basically his personal death squad. These weren't regular soldiers. They were fanatics who swore absolute loyalty to Ivan and carried out the most horrific acts imaginable. Their symbol was a dog's head and a broom, representing their mission to sniff out treason and sweep it away. They would ride into towns, rape, torture, and murder anyone Ivan deemed disloyal. In 1570, Ivan suspected the city of Novgorod of treason. His response? He ordered the systematic destruction of the entire city. The Oprichniki surrounded Novgorod and began a 5-week orgy of violence. They tortured men, women, and children with unimaginable cruelty. Families were tied together and thrown into the icy Volkhov River through holes cut in the ice. Those who tried to swim were beaten back under with clubs. Priests were burned alive in their churches. Children were roasted on spits in front of their parents. Conservative estimates put the death toll at 2,700, but some historians believe it reached 15,000, nearly the entire population of the city. But Ivan's most infamous act was killing his own son. In 1581, Ivan caught his pregnant daughter-in-law wearing clothes he deemed inappropriate. He beat her so severely she miscarried. When his son confronted him about it, Ivan flew into a rage and struck him in the head with his scepter. His son died 3 days later from the injury. The famous painting by Ilya Repin shows Ivan cradling his dying son's bloody head, finally realizing what his madness had cost him. Ivan spent his final years in paranoid terror, convinced everyone was trying to poison him. He died in 1584 while playing chess, possibly from mercury poisoning, either accidental or self-administered. Even his own nobles celebrated his death. But our number 2 was so proud of his torture methods, he carved them into stone monuments as advertisements. Now we're going back over 2,800 years to meet a king so cruel that his own inscriptions read like horror stories. What makes Ashurnasirpal more evil than Ivan is that he perfected cruelty to a level that hasn't been matched in human history, and he was methodical and proud of every horrific thing he did. Ashurnasirpal was so proud of his cruelty that he carved detailed descriptions of his torture methods into stone monuments, his own bragging inscriptions. His favourite method was impalement, but he perfected the technique to maximize suffering. He would impale victims through their torso in a way that avoided vital organs, so they would slowly die over days while displayed as warnings. One inscription reads, "I flayed all the chief men who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skins. Some I walled up within the pillar, some I impaled upon the pillar on stakes." When he conquered the city of Suru, he skinned the rebels alive, then used their skins to cover the city walls as decoration. He would gouge out prisoners' eyes, cut off their hands and feet, then display their mutilated bodies on poles around conquered cities. He would capture a city's children, mutilate them horrifically, then send them back to their parents as a message. Entire populations would surrender without a fight rather than face his wrath. His inscriptions describe burning prisoners alive, feeding people to wild animals, and forcing parents to watch as their children were tortured to death. One account describes how he had prisoners' lips and tongues cut out, then forced them to eat their own severed body parts. The most terrifying part, Ashurnasirpal ruled for 24 years and died peacefully in his palace, surrounded by wealth stolen from his victims. He was never punished, and is remembered in Assyrian history as a great conqueror. Our number 1 killed more people than everyone else combined, while the world celebrated him as a hero. At number 1 is Leopold II of Belgium, who orchestrated one of the worst genocides in human history, killing an estimated 10 million people in the Congo. What makes Leopold the most evil king in history is the calculated deception. While the others were openly brutal, Leopold convinced the world he was a humanitarian while secretly running a death machine from his Belgian palaces. In 1885, Leopold convinced European powers to give him personal control over the Congo Free State. He promised to bring civilization and end slavery. Instead, he turned it into his personal slave camp. If villages didn't meet their rubber quotas, Leopold's private army would cut off the hands of men, women, and children. The soldiers were paid bonuses for hands collected, so they would cut off hands from living people. Villages would be found with hundreds missing their hands, left to die from infection. Leopold's men would take women and children hostage, chaining them in concentration camps until their husbands brought enough rubber to buy their freedom. One missionary described finding a man sitting beside a small smoked hand, his 5-year-old daughter's hand. The soldiers had taken it as punishment for his village's failure to meet the rubber quota. Between 1885 and 1908, the Congo's population dropped from 20 million to 10 million people. That's genocide on the scale of the Holocaust. When reports finally reached Europe, Leopold was forced to give up control in 1908. But he never faced justice. He died peacefully in 1909, one of Europe's richest men, having made his fortune from mass murder. Leopold used his blood money to build monuments to himself across Belgium. Statues of this genocidal maniac still stand today. These 5 kings prove that absolute power doesn't just corrupt, It can turn ordinary men into monsters beyond our worst nightmares. From John's personal murders to Leopold's industrial-scale genocide, these rulers show us the darkest depths of human evil. The scariest part: most of these men died peacefully, never facing justice for their crimes. They lived lives of luxury built on the suffering of millions. History has a way of forgetting the worst atrocities, especially when they're committed by those in power. But we can't let that happen. We have to remember these monsters and their victims, so we never let evil like this rise again.